The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe. She sat there, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the man in front of her. His presence filled the space, powerful, commanding, almost intimidating. He was everything she wasn't: wealthy, confident, untouchable, tent. And yet, here they were, two worlds colliding in a moment neither of them could have predicted. Her fingers hovered hesitantly over his knee, unsure if what she was about to do would change anything or everything. What happened next defied logic, shattered expectations, and left both their lives forever altered. Her name was Mia, and life hadn't been kind to her. Growing up in a small town with barely enough to eat, she'd always felt like an outsider looking in on a world she didn't belong to. But Mia had something no one else did: a gift, though she never thought of it that way. It was more like a burden, something she couldn't explain or control. People called it strange, miraculous even, but Mia just saw it as another thing that set her apart from everyone else. That day, sitting across from Alexander Kane, the CEO, whose name echoed through headlines and boardrooms, she didn't know how much her so-called gift would come to mean. All she knew was that this encounter wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Alexander Kane wasn't used to feeling vulnerable. As the head of one of the largest tech companies in the world, he prided himself on being unshakable. Nothing rattled him: not failed deals, not scandals, not even the occasional lawsuit. Yet here he was, leaning back in his chair, trying to mask the pain shooting through his leg. For months, doctors had poked and prodded him, prescribing treatments, surge, that ranged from invasive surgeries to experimental therapies. None of it worked. His once unstoppable stride had slowed to a limp, and whispers around the office hinted at weakness, a word Alexander despised. So, when his assistant suggested bringing in someone unconventional, someone who claimed to have healing abilities, he dismissed the idea outright, until desperation crept in. Now, as he watched Mia nervously fidget in front of him, he wondered, if he'd made a mistake letting her into his office. Mia's heart pounded as she glanced at the clock on the wall. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second ticking by louder than the last. She hadn't asked for this to be summoned to some luxurious penthouse suite where every detail screamed wealth and privilege. This wasn't her world. Back home, she patched together odd jobs to make ends meet, avoiding attention at all costs. Her gift had brought her nothing but trouble over the years. People either feared her or exploited her. But now, staring at the man who embodied everything she'd spent her life running from, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could use her ability to help someone truly in need. Even if that someone was Alexander Kane. As Mia reached out, her fingertips brushing lightly against his knee, Alexander flinched instinctively. He wasn't accustomed to physical touch outside formal handshakes or polite gestures. The sensation, seconds, was foreign, unexpected, and then, something extraordinary happened. A warmth spread through his leg, starting where her hand rested and radiating outward. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a trick of the mind desperate for relief. But the pain began to ebb away, replaced by a tingling sensation that felt almost electric. His eyes widened as he glanced down at his leg, half expecting to see some visible sign of what was happening. There was nothing obvious, yet he could feel it. It was as if years of wear and tear were unraveling, leaving behind only strength and vitality. Mia pulled her hand back quickly, startled by the intensity of what she'd just done. She'd healed people before, sure, but never anyone like him, never someone so, formidable. Her cheeks flushed as she met his gaze, unsure whether to apologize or explain herself. I didn't mean to, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand, though his expression betrayed a mix of awe and confusion. What just happened? He demanded, his tone sharper than intended. Mia swallowed hard, gripping the edge of her seat to steady herself. I don't know, she admitted honestly. It's just something I can do. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had transpired hung heavy in the air between them. Alexander flexed his leg experimentally, standing up to test its newfound strength. To his astonishment, the limp was gone. He moved effortlessly, as though the injury had never existed. Turning back to Mia, he studied her carefully, searching for any hint of deception. But there was none, only wide, uncertain eyes staring up at him. Copouds, you're telling me you healed me, he said slowly, skepticism creeping into his voice despite the evidence in front of him. Mia nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. Yes, she replied softly, but I don't understand why it worked this time. That question lingered unanswered, hanging over them like a storm cloud ready to burst. Why had it worked? Mia's gift had always been unpredictable, sometimes failing completely when she needed it most. Cohen. And yet, here she was, sitting in the gleaming office of a man whose power and influence dwarfed anything she'd ever known, and somehow she'd managed to heal him. Was it fate, coincidence, or something deeper, something neither of them fully understood? Whatever the reason, it was clear that this moment marked the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated. As Alexander paced the length of his office, his mind raced with possibilities. If what Mia claimed was true, if her ability was real, then the implications were staggering. Not just for him personally, but for his company, for medicine, for the entire world. Koki. He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. How many others know about this? He asked, his voice low and measured. Mia hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. Not many, she admitted. Most people don't believe me, They think I'm crazy. Alexander frowned, his sharp mind already calculating angles and strategies. And you've never tried to monetize it? He pressed, the businessman in him unable to ignore the potential value of what he'd witnessed. Mia shook her head firmly. No, she said, her voice steadier now. This isn't something I want to sell or turn into a spectacle. It's personal, private. Her words struck a chord in Alexander, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Perhaps it was the conviction in her voice, or the way she seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the idea of profit. Either way, it gave him pause. Kanto. For all his success, Alexander had built his empire on calculated risks and ruthless ambition. Yet here was Mia, possessing something far more valuable than anything he'd ever achieved, and refusing to exploit it. It was infuriating, inspiring, confusing, and undeniably intriguing. The tension between them grew palpable as they continued talking, each probing the other for answers neither was entirely ready to give. Alexander wanted to understand the mechanics of Mia's gift, to dissect it and figure out how it worked. Mia, on the other hand, simply wanted to leave. The longer she stayed in his opulent office, surrounded by reminders of a life she could never imagine living, the more out of place she felt. But there was something about Alexander's curiosity that kept her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the way he listened, really listened, instead of dismissing her outright. Or maybe it was the glimmer of vulnerability she glimpsed beneath his polished exterior. Whatever it was, it made her hesitate. Eventually, Alexander leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if trying to process everything. "All right," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Let's say I believe you. Let's say this gift of yours is real. What happens now?" Kai blinked, caught off guard by the question. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Healing others had always been an isolated act, something she did quietly and without fanfare. The idea of stepping into Alexander's world, of allowing him to shape her gift into something bigger, was overwhelming. "I don't know," she admitted after a long pause. "I guess we'll figure it out." But figuring it out wouldn't be easy. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that their worlds were too different, their perspectives too far apart. Alexander saw opportunity. Mia saw responsibility. He talked about testing her abilities, documenting results, and exploring applications. She countered with concerns about privacy, ethics, and the dangers of exposing her gift to scrutiny. Their conversation veered between heated debates and moments of uneasy agreement, neither willing to fully concede ground. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, they were no closer to resolving their differences. And then came the knock at the door. Neither of them had heard anyone approach, and the sound startled them both. Alexander frowned, rising to answer it, while Mia remained seated, her thoughts swirling chaotically. When the door opened, revealing a tall, impeccably dressed woman holding a tablet. Alexander's demeanor shifted instantly. "Victoria," he greeted curtly, his tone clipped. "What is it?" The woman, clearly an executive of some sort, passed him, her sharp eyes landing briefly on Mia before returning to Alexander. "We need to discuss the merger," she said smoothly, her voice carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "Now." Mia watched silently as Alexander exchanged a few terse words with Victoria, sensing the gravity of whatever situation awaited him outside the room. When he turned back to her, his expression was unreadable. "We're not done here," he said, firmly addressing Mia. "I'll send a car for you tomorrow morning. Be ready." Before she could respond, he disappeared into the hallway, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The room suddenly felt colder, emptier. Mia sat there for a moment longer, trying to wrap her head around everything that had happened. Healing Alexander's leg had been the easy part. Navigating the tangled web of consequences that followed that was going to be infinitely harder. as she stood to leave, her legs shaky beneath her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped onto a path with no clear destination. One thing was certain, though, whatever lay ahead, it was bound to change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Back at her tiny apartment, Mia replayed the events of the day in her mind, unable to sleep. Every detail, the way Alexander had looked at her, the intensity of their conversation, the mysterious knock at the door kept looping endlessly. She told herself it was just nerves, but deep down, she knew better. Something about Alexander Kane unsettled her, not because he was intimidating or powerful, but because he seemed determined to uncover truths she wasn't sure she was ready to face. And now, with his promise to send a car for her the next morning, she realized there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, she was in it, for better or worse. Meanwhile, miles away in his penthouse suite, Alexander poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring out at the city skyline. His leg still felt stronger than it had in years, a fact that should have brought him peace but instead left him restless. Who was Mia really? What was she capable of? And more importantly, how could he harness her gift without losing control of the situation? These questions swirled in his mind, keeping him awake long into the night. Tomorrow would bring answers, or, at least, the start of them. But as Alexander sipped his drink, gazing out at the glittering lights below, he couldn't shake the nagging sense that this was only the beginning of a much larger story. The next morning, Mia woke to the sound of a car horn outside her apartment. She peeked through the blinds, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the sleek black sedan waiting for her. It was surreal. This wasn't her life. She lived in a cramped studio with peeling wallpaper and secondhand furniture, not chauffeured rides to Hyries offices. Still, she grabbed her bag, threw on the least worn outfit she owned, and stepped outside. The driver nodded politely as he opened the door for her, but Mia barely noticed. Her mind was racing, replaying every word Alexander had said the day before. "We're not done here," he'd told her. What exactly did that mean? And why did it feel like stepping into his world again would change everything? As the car glided through the city streets, Mia stared out the window, watching the blur of shops and pedestrians give way to towering skyscrapers. She couldn't help but wonder what people would think if they knew where she was headed or who she was meeting. Would they believe her story? Or would they dismiss her as some naive girl caught up in something far beyond her understanding? Either way, she realized there was no going back now. Whatever Alexander wanted from her, whatever role he intended for her to play, she owed it to herself to find out. After years of living quietly, avoiding attention, she felt an unfamiliar spark of determination ignite within her. When she arrived at Kane Enterprises, the lobby was bustling with activity. Employees hurried past in sharp suits, their faces glued to tablets or phones. Security guards stood at attention near gleaming elevators, while receptionists greeted visitors with practiced smiles. Mia felt out of place immediately, her worn sneakers and faded jeans drawing curious glances. But before anyone could question her presence, a young woman approached her. "Miss Harper?" she asked crisply, clipboard in hand. Mia nodded hesitantly, and the woman gestured for her to follow. They rode the elevator in silence, the numbers climbing higher and higher until they reached the top floor. When the doors slid open, Mia found herself face to face with Alexander once again. He looked different, today less guarded, more focused. His suit was impeccable, his posture commanding, but there was a flicker of anticipation in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Good. You're here," he said briskly, motioning for her to sit. Without wasting time, he launched into an explanation of what he had planned. He spoke of tests, research protocols, and potential breakthroughs, all framed in clinical terms. That made Mia's head spin. At one point, she interrupted him. "Wait," she said, her voice firm despite the knot forming in her stomach. "You're talking about treating me like some kind of experiment. I'm not a lab rat, Mr. Kane." Alexander paused, studying her carefully. There was fire in her tone now, a defiance he hadn't expected. For a moment, he considered backing down, but then he remembered the sensation of standing without pain for the first time in months. That alone was worth pursuing, no matter how stubborn she might be. "I understand your concerns," he replied evenly. "But think about it, Mia. If we can figure out how your gift works, imagine the possibilities. We could help thousands, millions of people." His words struck a chord, and Mia bit her lip, torn between skepticism and hope. Could she really make a difference? Or was this just another way for someone powerful to take advantage of her? While Mia wrestled with her doubts, Alexander faced challenges of his own. News of his sudden recovery had already begun to spread through the company, fueling rumors and speculation. Some whispered that he'd undergone secret surgery. Others claimed it was a miracle cure developed by his R&D team. Only Victoria, his trusted advisor, seemed suspicious. She cornered him later that afternoon, her sharp gaze cutting through his usual composure. "What aren't you telling me, Alex?" she demanded, using the nickname only she dared to call him. He hesitated, weighing his options. Trusting Victoria meant risking exposure, but keeping her in the dark could jeopardize everything. Finally, he sighed. "There's someone new involved," he admitted vaguely. "Someone with unique abilities." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Unique abilities?" she echoed skeptically. "You mean like a psychic hotline or a late-night infomercial gimmick?" Alexander bristled at her dismissive tone but forced himself to stay calm. "It's complicated," he said simply. "And until I have answers, I need you to trust me." Victoria didn't look convinced, but she nodded reluctantly. "Fine," she said, "but don't expect me to clean up the mess if this blows up in your face." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Alexander to wonder if he'd made a mistake confiding in her. Back in her temporary office, small, windowless room provided by Alexander, Mia struggled to focus. The weight of his proposal pressed heavily on her shoulders. On one hand, she couldn't deny the allure of helping others. Growing up poor and overlooked, she'd always dreamed of making a difference. But on the other hand, the idea of being studied, analyzed, and potentially exploited terrified her. What if they discovered something about her gift that she couldn't control? Worse yet, what if they tried to replicate it, or worse, weaponize it? These thoughts haunted her as she flipped aimlessly through the stack of papers Alexander had given her, each document outlining plans for experiments and data collection. Her unease grew when she overheard snippets of conversations among the staff. Healer. Some referred to her as the healer, their voices tinged with curiosity. Others were less kind, calling her a fraud or a publicity stunt. One particularly cruel remark sent a chill down her spine. If she's so special, why does she dress like she shops at thrift stores? Mia clenched her fists, reminding herself that their opinions didn't matter. Still, the sting lingered. Was she truly welcome here, or was she just another pawn in Alexander's grand scheme? As days turned into weeks, tensions escalated. Mia agreed to participate in limited testing, but only under strict conditions. No invasive procedures, no public exposure, and no attempts to monetize her gift. Alexander reluctantly complied, though it was clear he chafed at the restrictions. Meanwhile, Victoria kept a watchful eye on the situation, her suspicions growing with each passing day. She began digging into Mia's background, uncovering details even Mia herself preferred to forget. When Victoria confronted Alexander with her findings, the air crackled with tension. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" she snapped, slapping a file onto his desk. Inside were records of Mia's childhood, her struggles, her brushes with authority, and most damning of all, accounts of incidents involving her supposed gift. Alexander skimmed the documents, his expression unreadable. "This changes nothing," he said finally, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Victoria leaned forward, her tone icy. "Oh, it changes everything. You're gambling the reputation of this company and, possibly your own career. A girl with a sketchy past, and an even sketchier talent. Are you sure that's a risk worth taking?" Alexander didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out the window, his mind racing. Cain. He thought about the pain he'd endured, the countless treatments that had failed him. Then he thought about the moment Mia had healed him, the warmth spreading through his leg like sunlight breaking through clouds. Against all odds, he believed her. And maybe, just maybe, that belief was enough. The turning point came during a routine test session. Mia sat in a sterile lab, surrounded by monitors and cameras, feeling more like a specimen than a person. Coet, a researcher, instructed her to place her hands on a volunteer's injured wrist, explaining that they needed to measure the energy transfer or lack thereof. As Mia complied, focusing intently on the task, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual warmth, a surge of energy coursed through her, stronger and more intense than ever before. The volunteer gasped, jerking their hand away as the injury visibly mended itself in seconds. The room fell silent, everyone staring in stunned disbelieving Mia. Word of the incident spread quickly, reaching Victoria almost instantly. She stormed into Alexander's office, her face flushed with anger. "This is getting out of hand," she seethed. "People are starting to ask questions. Reporters are sniffing around. If we don't get ahead of this, it's going to blow up in our faces." Alexander listened quietly, his jaw tightening. He knew she was right, but pulling back now felt impossible. Not after seeing what Mia could do, not after experiencing it himself. "Then we'll manage it," he said firmly. "But we're not shutting this down. Victoria shook her head, exasperated. You're playing with fire, Alex. Sooner or later, someone's going to get burned. With that, she left, slamming the door behind her. Alexander sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. For the first time, he questioned whether he was doing the right thing. Was he protecting me or exploiting her? If the truth came out, would he be able to shield her from the fallout? That evening, Alexander sought Mia out. He found her sitting alone in the break room, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. She looked exhausted, her defenses worn thin. How are you holding up? He asked gently, surprising even himself with the sincerity in his voice. Mia glanced up, forcing a weak smile. I'm fine, she lied. Just tired. Alexander hesitated, then sat across from her. Listen, he began, choosing his words carefully. I know this isn't easy for you, and I know I've pushed you further than I should have, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Mia studied him, searching for any sign of ulterior motives. All she saw was vulnerability, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the polished exterior. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. But promise me one thing. Alexander leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Anything. Mia took a deep breath, steeling herself. Promise me you won't let them turn me into a spectacle. No, matter what happens, I want to stay in control of my gift. Alexander met her gaze, his resolve hardening. You have my word, he vowed. But as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that promises were easier made than kept. Unbeknownst to either of them, forces beyond their control were already in motion. Across the city, reporters pieced together fragments of information, eager to uncover the truth behind the mysterious healer linked to Kane Enterprises. Meanwhile, rival companies smelled opportunity, dispatching spies to infiltrate the organization and gather intel. Back at the office, tensions simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. And somewhere in the shadows, a figure watched silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For Mia and Alexander, the stakes had never been higher. Each decision brought them closer to answers or disaster. Neither knew exactly where this path would lead. But one thing was certain. The choices they made next would define not only their futures but the fate of countless others as well. As night fell over the city, casting long shadows across Kane Enterprises, the air buzzed with anticipation. Something big was coming, and neither of them was ready. Days blurred into weeks. The pressure on Mia and Alexander reached a breaking point. Reporters camped outside Kane Enterprises, their cameras flashing like strobe lights whenever anyone entered or exited the building. Whispers of the miracle healer spread across social media, turning Mia's name into both a beacon of hope and a target for skepticism. Meanwhile, rival companies launched smear campaigns, accusing Alexander of orchestrating an elaborate hoax to boost his company's stock value. The tension inside the office was palpable. Employees walked on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, while Victoria grew increasingly vocal about her disapproval. One evening, as Mia prepared to leave after another grueling day of tests, she noticed something unusual. A man in a dark coat lingered near the lobby, watching her with unsettling intensity. When their eyes met, he smiled faintly before disappearing into the crowd. It wasn't until later that night, when she returned home to find her apartment ransacked, that the fear truly set in. Drawers were overturned, papers scattered across the floor, but nothing seemed stolen. Instead, a single note lay on her kitchen counter. "Stop what you're doing, or else." Her hands trembled as she read it, her mind racing with possibilities. Who would threaten her? And why now? The next morning, she showed the note to Alexander, who immediately called security. His face hardened as he studied the cryptic message, his protective instincts kicking in. "You're staying at my place tonight," he declared firmly. Mia opened her mouth to protest, but one look at his resolute expression silenced her. She didn't fully trust him, not yet, but she couldn't deny the gnawing sense that danger lurked closer than ever. Reluctantly, she agreed. At Alexander's penthouse, the atmosphere shifted. Gone was the formal CEO persona. Instead, Mia saw glimpses of the man behind the title, a man burdened by responsibility, driven by ambition, but also capable of genuine care. Over dinner, they talked openly for the first time, sharing fragments of their lives they'd kept hidden. Mia spoke of her childhood, of growing up in poverty, and learning to hide her gift out of fear. Alexander confessed his own struggles, weight of expectations, the loneliness that came with power. For the first time, they weren't employer and subject, they were allies, bound together by circumstances neither could have foreseen. But even as they found common ground, the storm brewing around them intensified. The following day, a major news outlet published an expose claiming Mia was part of a secret government experiment gone rogue. The story went viral, sparking outrage and conspiracy theories. Protesters gathered outside Kane Enterprises, some demanding answers, others calling for Mia's arrest. Amid the chaos, Victoria confronted Alexander once more. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "You brought her here. You put us all at risk. If this blows up, the board will crucify you." Alexander stood his ground, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "I can handle the fallout," he replied, his tone steady despite the turmoil swirling inside him. "What I won't do is abandon her." Victoria stared at him, incredulous. "For someone who prides himself on logic, you're acting awfully reckless," she snapped before storming off. Alexander watched her go, knowing she might be right, but unable to walk away. The climax came unexpectedly. Late that night, as Mia sat in Alexander's living room flipping through channels, a loud crash echoed from the balcony. They froze, hearts pounding, before rushing to investigate. Standing there, silhouetted against the city lights, was the man in the dark coat. He held a gun, his gaze cold and unwavering. "Step away from her," he commanded, leveling the weapon at Alexander. Panic surged through Mia, but instinct took over. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placing herself between the intruder and Alexander. "You don't want to hurt anyone," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The man hesitated, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Move," he growled. But Mia didn't budge. Instead, she reached out, her hand brushing his arm. In an instant, a wave of calm washed over him, his body relaxing as if under a spell. The gun clattered to the floor, and he stumbled back, confusion etched across his face. Before either of them could react, security burst onto the scene, overpowering the intruder and dragging him away. In the aftermath, the truth began to unravel. The man worked for a shadowy organization intent on exploiting Mia's gift for profit and power. Their plan had been to eliminate Alexander and force Mia into compliance, but her courage and quick thinking thwarted them. With evidence provided by the captured operative, authorities dismantled the group, exposing their illegal activities to the world. The scandal rocked the nation, shifting public opinion in Mia and Alexander's favor. What had once been viewed as a hoax became a symbol of resilience and humanity. As the dust settled, Mia faced a choice. Alexander offered her a permanent role within Kane Enterprises, working alongside researchers to explore ethical applications of her gift. At first, she hesitated, wary of stepping further into the spotlight. But after witnessing the impact her abilities could have saving lives, easing suffering, she realized she couldn't turn away. Together, they established strict guidelines to ensure her work remained compassionate and controlled, free from exploitation. Victoria, too, underwent a transformation. Watching Alexander and Mia navigate the crisis with integrity forced her to reevaluate her priorities. Though she still questioned their methods, she came to respect their commitment to doing what was right even when it was hard. Slowly, the rift between them healed, strengthening the foundation of the company. Months later, standing on a stage at a charity gala hosted by Kane Enterprises, Mia addressed a crowd eager to hear her story. "I never asked for this," she admitted, her voice steady despite the sea of faces before her. "But sometimes, life gives us opportunities we can't ignore. Opportunities to help, to heal, to make a difference. This isn't about me, about all of us, working together to create a better future." As applause erupted, she glanced at Alexander, who stood nearby, nodding approvingly. For the first time, she felt not just accepted, but valued. The journey hadn't been easy, and scars remained. Yet through adversity, Mia and Alexander discovered something greater than power or fame: purpose. Their partnership proved that even the most unlikely alliances could spark change, reminding everyone who followed their story that true strength lies not in dominance, but in compassion. As the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Mia smiled softly, knowing she'd finally found her place in the world.